you talked about the Arab world in general now during the lectures, but do you see some kind of regional trends? Is it a different development between countries?
Within the Arab world?
Yeah,
yes,
or the Middle East?
Well, there are some generalities that are common across the region. You find Islamist movements, you find increasing tribalism, you find the private sector growing, you find corruption issues. So there's some trends that are common throughout the region, but they vary according to each country, of course.
Okay, so is it different problems that they are facing today within the countries, or do you see that the things that you talked about today, is it you can use it on all the countries?
Generally, yes. I think generally what I was talking about today applies to most of the countries of the Arab world, and even to some other ones like Iran and Turkey and places. But it varies. I mean, a very small, rich country like Kuwait will have less of a problem with, say, poverty than a country like Yemen. So it varies. In a country with a more open and relaxed system, like, say, Lebanon, will have different issues than a more tightly controlled country like Libya or Tunisia. So there are variations, but there are also some common trends across the region.
Yes, I just a short elaboration on what you meant, the monarch, the mall, and the mosque. And what's that?
Well, when I say the monarch, the mall, and the mosque, it means there's three general groups in society now that have emerged and are strong and are active and play a role in the public discussions that take place, and also are involved in negotiating power relationships. So the monarch means the government. They're not all monarchies. Some of them are republics, or some of them are police states, but the government authority is the monarch, and the people who are with the government authority. The mall means the private sector, the non-government organizations, the people who work in society, who are not part of the government, and who have a lot of power. And then the third one, the mosque, is a shorthand for the groups that use religion or tribal identity or ethnic identity, the people who are organized according to common identities, and also work in public, politically and socially, and some of them militarily. So you have these three broad groups of people who are now more clear. Before they all existed, but they were suppressed. After the end of the Cold War, these societies opened up, and therefore these groups became more visible because they were operating in public. And that's what I think we have today, these three broad categories.
You took up the aspect of power, the power aspect. Do you think that differs within the Arab world towards, not only towards, but in, if you compare it to how the power aspect is in Western civilization, is it a major difference between the Arab world and Western?
Well, there is one major difference in the Arab world, which is that it's non-democratic. The entire region doesn't have any real credible democratic systems. Therefore, people cannot exercise power in the same way that they can, say, in the Western countries, where, like in Sweden or Canada, you have elections, you have political parties. Somebody wins, somebody loses, there's a peaceful transfer of power, and the citizens can constantly change things through the law or through elections. Or in our countries, you don't have that. Power is closely held by the ruling elite, and it doesn't transfer very easily. So you have countries where, like in Libya, the ruler of Libya, Gaddafi, has been there for 40 years. And is probably going to be there another 10 or 20 years. And then he'll turn power to his son, probably. So that's the main difference between Arab countries and Western democracies.
Yeah. And why do you think why that is? Why isn't there a single Arab democracy? And why do the institution of peaceful transition of power, why doesn't it exist?
I think it's largely the consequence of two things. The first is the way these countries were created. Most of these countries were not created voluntarily by their own people. Most of them were created by the retreating European colonial powers, who carved out these countries put a local elite in power, gave them authority and said, you're now the president or the king of this country, which didn't exist before. And therefore, the people in power suddenly found themselves running a country, and they had the government and the army and the bureaucracy, and they started to sort of run these countries, and the minute somebody challenged them, they clamped down. And I think that's one main reason where it's an abnormal birth of these countries and the abnormal relationships between the power elite, the ruling government, and the rest of society. The second reason, I think, is the impact of the Arab-Israeli conflict on some of them, but not all of them, which created a need to have a defense, a bigger defense system, and therefore, when you have large armies without democracy, they lead to further abuses of power, and just it leads to an entrenched authoritarian system. So it's a combination of those two things, I think, that probably explain them. And the third factor possibly is the Cold War for 50 years gave support to these governments. The non-democratic governments were supported by the US and the West and by the Russians both, and that made them even stronger. And some of them had a lot of oil money which they could use. So it's really a combination of all of these factors.